Welcome, everyone, to the
Hello.
Light and Life Group community. And tonight we're going to have a three-part presentation. We'll start off with Barbara Newsom talking about the life and times of Carolyn Kendall, who was recently passed on. And then Byron will host Chris Morris, who will talk some about George Bernard, who was also passed on. And then we'll have some breakouts at the very end for the last part. Uh, Barbara Kazin, would you like to start with a prayer?
Yes. Father Michael, Infinite Mother Spirit, thank you for giving us this opportunity to come together to share in the celebration of the lives that we remember tonight, Carolyn Kendall and George Bernard. They were so close to the angelic helpers and the midwayers and spent their lives helping all of us. We thank you for their lives and how they have impacted ours. Help us to love one another as Christ loved us and to commit our lives to loving service. Amen.
Amen. So be it.
Thank you, Barbara. Barbara Newsom, would you like to pick it up from here?
Sure. Thanks so much. And for those that I haven't met, I live in the suburbs of Chicago, and behind me, this was appropriate for remembering Carolyn tonight, is a watercolor of Diversey Harbor. So if you're standing on the shore and looking toward Chicago, you can see John Hancock over there and Sears Tower. This was a fairly recent one, which is not there when Carolyn Kendall was involved. But I wanted to just say what a great joy it is to be able to speak about Carolyn tonight. And again, for those who might not know me, Carolyn and I started reading in 1965 in Kansas, but I was with my parents. I was 17. And so that's a quick history of me. I really spent my early time in reading the Urantia book in the Midwest, but also in Oklahoma City with the Oklahoma's Urantia Brotherhood Society at the time. And ultimately, I had seen Carolyn at various conferences. In those days, if you were one of the kids, I don't know, Dolores, when you joined the kids, but we were traveling all over the country like the kids have done now. I'm old, they're young. Where we would go to conferences and I would see Carolyn or knew of her, but I didn't really get to know her till I moved to Chicago in 1975 to work at 533 Diversey Parkway. I was working for Urantia Brotherhood for a very short time with John Hales. We had all just started, and this was 75, with employment at the Urantia Brotherhood office and Urantia Foundation offices. In those days, everything was done volunteer. In fact, Leon Sadler was still shipping Urantia books for volunteer for Urantia Brotherhood, things like that. So some of you remember those times, or you may have heard of those times. And that's when I really got to know Carolyn. From that point on, we were constantly sharing similar interests. So that's what I'll talk about tonight. Carolyn and I both really enjoyed thinking about the future of the Urantia Revelation. When I was young, I think that's really why I was so excited about reading the Urantia book early, because I cared so much about the future, and I still do. My focus is very future oriented. So Carolyn and I were always reading the parts of the book together or talking about the parts of the book that talk about destiny. Where are we headed as a planet? What does that mean? And that led to a number of co-presentations that we did over the years on planetary mortal epics. But very much so, we began talking about the future in terms of for example, Trinity teacher sons, and particularly how the Trinity teacher sons arrive with Avenel sons. And then that led to talking about her very strong conclusion pretty early on. I mean, at least in my life, her article that is so well known was in 2002. She wrote an article called "Who's Coming Next?" And by that time, in 2002, Carolyn had decided that definitely we were getting a magisterial mission, an Avenel son. We didn't know when, how, whatever, but always we could talk about that and so on. So that's really how I became involved in this particular group last fall. And I did want to say a little about Carolyn's life. She was born in Ohio. Her father, Clarence Bowman, was an original member of the Forum, meaning in 1923, before the Urantia book started coming in. They had moved to Chicago by then. Carolyn went to high school in Chicago because her father, Clarence, was a postal worker for the United States Postal Service on the trains. He would ride trains around the Midwest and pick up and deliver mail, literally whenever there was a stop of the train. So if you know anything about Clarence Bowman's diary, he kept a diary. He was like Carolyn and her brother Larry. She had a younger brother, Larry. Carolyn and all of them had a gift of writing and journalism and good memories. So Larry kept a diary all during the Forum, including the very first announcement that Melchizedek made in 2011, February 2011 of 2024, that there would be a Urantia book. So he was keeping all these notes, and at some point, very late in the whole Forum experience, I would say into the 40s, he discovered from one of the contact commissioners that they weren't supposed to keep diaries. And he said, "Oh my goodness." So he used whiteout over all of his diary notes about the Forum, and of course it didn't last. So Carolyn has one of the most important histories of the Forum written by her father, and the days that he missed were when he was riding the trains. In other words, he would miss some meetings. It's not a complete every single Sunday at the Forum. But then Carolyn joined in 1951, late 1951, and she had just graduated from high school and was invited a few months after that to work as a receptionist in Dr. Sadler's office. And he and I believe years of talking to her about it kind of trained her about how the Forum worked and what he did to allow people in. You had to be 16 years old. If you never knew Tiki Harries, who's now passed on as well, Tiki was the very first one, and Carolyn was 18, having just graduated from high school. So he was allowing her to listen to him interview people who wanted to join the Forum. And he would say to Carolyn, "Now, did I tell the story right? Did you hear that right? I want to try to tell everyone the same history." But of course, it was just talking, so he might misspeak or say something. So they often would talk about history. She knew all of the contact commissioners well, except for Lena Sadler, who died in 1939. So she never knew Dr. Lena. But of course, she knew Bill and the others who were related to Lena. So she had quite a rich introduction to the Urantia community, we would call it now, or the movement of all of our communities. And she just continued in that way. She invited her fiance, Tom Kendall, to come to the Forum. And then she worked for Dr. Sadler until 1954, when her first son was born. She had 5 children. She has 7 grandchildren. And Tom, of course, later became president of Urantia Foundation. They were members of First Society. They also founded Orvantan Society, and then went back to First Society toward the end of their lives. But I met her in First Society, and I learned a lot of my history of the society from Carolyn. So we just had a friendship, and I'm trying to remember things about Carolyn. She continued to be a really good administrator. She was an administrative assistant when her children were older in a large school system, worked for the superintendent in the western suburbs of Chicago. But then she was called back into service for Urantia Brotherhood, which had then become, well, it was the Brotherhood and then the Fellowship. So she worked again in the Brotherhood offices when it was on Wrightwood, for example, in Chicago. So I'm trying to think of other highlights about Carolyn. One thing I haven't noticed in some of the online comments that are just lovely on the Fellowship website about Carolyn, she was an artist. She drew many fascinating pen and ink drawings, for example, of paradise and how it would look, and all kinds of fascinating things.
Mm.
In addition to her own love of writing and keeping notes. We were on the executive committee in Urantia Brotherhood together from 75 to 80. Let's see, what would it have been? No, I'm sorry, from 76 to 85. So I would never worry about taking notes because Carolyn was sitting there like a scribe taking everything down. Because sometimes the minutes don't include all the details of what people discussed or did or said. So I really relied on Carolyn, but essentially we just collaborated a lot on the importance of looking to the future and taking care of future generations. So I wanted to read just a few excerpts of this whole concept of, with every epical revelation, one of the responsibilities we have while we're alive on the planet is to prepare for the next revelation, or the next part of a revelation in this case. She says that in this article about who's coming next, where she had concluded definitely we're getting an Avenal son, it's just a question of when and how. She says the Urantia book is not an end in itself. The primary purpose for sending a new revelation in book form to the peoples of the world is threefold: to prepare our world for the arrival of a new paradise son. That's number one. Number two, to prepare the world for emergence from the quarantine imposed at the time of the Lucifer Rebellion and Caligastia betrayal 200,000 years ago. Three, to assist humankind in achieving higher thinking, biologic fitness, social peace, cosmic consciousness, enhanced by spiritual perception, and the further outworking of the divine plan for the evolutionary worlds. Now, I think those three things sum up Carolyn's focus in life. And she shared it wherever she went. Many people said, the main thing, if you didn't know her, she had a fabulous smile. And when she smiled, you just felt you were welcomed as a friend of hers already. I didn't ever see her meet anyone that she didn't greet, just light up that way. So she was quite someone that lots of people remember who did get to know her. I'm just thinking I'll look at my notes if there was anything else, but I think that one article she wrote again in 2002 with her certainty about the Avenal son and how we should really be focusing on that, regardless of whatever else happens. That was the central focus of her encouragement to everyone that she met. That's why we decided to include her as one of our early pioneers in magisterial mission, if that makes any sense. And I'm open to questions. I didn't keep track of time. I'll have to leave that up to Dave and Byron and the other facilitators tonight. But I'm certainly open to questions.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes.
I have a question. If you can hear me.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, we can.
I guess I'm wondering why it took our foundation so long to accept the fact that we might be getting an Avanal sun. Can anybody explain that to me? How that kind of the ball, I feel like, was the ball dropped, or did other people not realize that? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't anything nefarious, but I just wondered, because it seems like it's been a long time for people to realize that this is happening. Can anybody explain that?
I'll take a quick crack at this and hear what others would say. It's interesting you asked, though, because Vicki, that was on my mind tonight or today as I was sort of preparing for this. I thought, well, how do I explain? Because I've been in a really gung ho. I was a kid that just fell for the Urantia book. I mean, I was in it full everything from 65 to now. And I would say it's evolutionary. In other words, for me to feel comfortable speaking this way and doing justice to Carolyn, because she then became a trustee emeritus of Urantia Foundation in 2002, 2005. And believe me, she wrote other papers for the trustees saying, look, here's the plan of the revelation. Wake up, everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't think it was, I think it's just the evolution of consciousness, cosmic consciousness, page 1 of the book, and then enhanced by spiritual perception. You have to have the consciousness, the concept, and people received it or came to it in different ways over the years, at least in my experience. And I loved being at Urantia Foundation in the 70s and 80s, because in those days we didn't have the internet. And people had to come to Chicago if they wanted to see what was going on or hear anything about it. And of course, we went through a phase in those days where if you were not a contact commissioner, you were not supposed to talk about history or transmission of the book, that mainly because they wanted everyone to get the story straight. Now, there are many stories you hear which come from the days of people just hearing something and it might sound true. Like we always heard in those days, we'd laugh in the office about how the Urantia book was discovered in a bus station in Cleveland. And the funny thing is, we knew that was just somebody had gotten that idea and it spread around as if it were true. But I've actually seen that on the internet now. So, there's just all this whatever.
Okay.
But in those days, they wanted the contact commissioners to be the ones to do the talking. And until Christy passed away, if you were trying to write history like Mark Kulicki and I were doing early on, because Clyde Bedell was passing on, and I didn't want to miss Clyde's history as an original member of the forum. There were just eras that we went through. When I joined, everyone talked about the history and about Midwayers and Makaventa and you name it, and all the spirit beings at 533 Diversity Parkway. Everyone talked about it. Then there was this period where we didn't talk about it. And then we've gone through all these different phases. Now I'd say everything is pretty much wide open, I hope, for people just to explore freely and in a loving way together about the unique experiences we're having with the Urantia revelation all over the world. I know that's what Carolyn felt. Carolyn and I, we had our last great visit in February of this year before COVID started. And I also had done just a videotape of one of our conversations in her living room a couple of years back, because she was pretty not mobile for a great while here with her declining health. But she was always sharp and just so excited about it. When I interviewed her for the magisterial mission, I wanted to be sure she agreed last fall. And she said, absolutely, I believe this even more than I ever did.
Mm. Well, thank you. Thank you for answering my question. And I'm so glad that we're reaching that point together. I just want to say that it was a question I asked Monjoranson that I was concerned about, that when he was becoming more and more present to many of us, and he really defended the forum. Not the forum, but the Urantia Foundation. And he said, look, their responsibility is to protect the veracity of that writing. And and so I thought that was very interesting that he presented that point of view to me, and I thought I should share that. So I have always appreciated the fact that we may not have always seen things the same way, but we all have roles to play here. And so I thought I'd pass that on. Thank you.
Anyone else? I don't have to be the only one addressing that question, but thank you so much, Vicki, for sharing that. It makes sense to me what you said.
Yes, it did to me too. Yeah, so.
Well, and one thing to think about is the trustees, and I worked for Urantia Foundation directly for the trustees under Tom Kendall, her husband. And I was helping Christy write her history notes that she wanted to be sure were preserved before she died. And so I would say what we talked about in confidence, I was an employee, I wasn't going to speak out.
No.
I felt an ethical responsibility to wait until it seemed like I was being invited to do so, or until now, where most of all of that is an open book.
Okay.
For good reason, and I think the text of the original book is well established in the world. So that was their first goal and responsibility, and not to be sidetracked by some of the history or the human history, really, not to be sidetracked by the human history with the interaction with their unseen friends. I think everyone knows the forum called Celestial Beings, their
The
unseen
unseen friends. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
everybody talked about their unseen friends.
Yeah.
And Barbara, if I recall from your earlier presentation, you had mentioned that Carolyn and you had the perception that many people in the forum were expecting the book to be a prelude to a magisterial mission. Is that, do I recall correctly?
At least some of them did think that, because they would discuss these things. Well, what might be happening in the future? What might we be laying the foundation for? They were very aware that that was their job, is to, in their day and time, lay a good foundation for the future. So that was certainly one of the main things that was talked about. What I do know is they all expected someone to be coming either sooner or later. And it could be several at once. I mean, Makaventa Melchizedek, our primary Seraphim, who is chief of Seraphim on the planet, said, I expect him any day, any hour. I mean, he could come whenever needed. So there could be a number of collaborations depending on what happens on Urantia. I mean, we're part of this. We are human partners in every possible way.
Does anybody ever mention the possibility of Michael's coming back? Hopefully.
Well, I wouldn't say I pray for it every single day. He's welcome in a moment.
Waiting.
But yes, people talked about when Michael might return. Would he return in a crisis? The same things we talk about now really were part of their discussions. I mean, they had all been through the Depression. I don't know how many of you know. I mean, Dr. Sadler nearly went under during the Depression. There were some businessmen in the forum who really supported their medical practice, Lena and Doctor, during some of those days. We've interviewed those folks for the history. And then it all turned out well, but they'd been through a lot of rough times from the Depression to World War II. And even the uncertainty during World War II, the book was delayed for publication because of World War II. And they apparently wanted to resolve a number of things before finally it was published in 1955. So there was this long waiting period. They were very aware of what we would consider emergencies and crises on the planet. And they very much believed that the celestial groups of all the different unseen friends would help them whenever needed. They were very trusting of that. Now, this was the forum. These were not people outside the forum or skeptics. I mean, if you were in the forum, you at least were believing enough to come every Sunday and listen to what the authorities, the celestial beings had said during the latest transmissions.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara, for sharing all of that. And especially at this time with Carolyn graduating. Byron, do you want to host the next part?
I will, yeah. Thanks a lot, Carolyn, and Barbara. Got you two fused together. And thanks for, because you were like, so close for a decade. So, there's so much more we could say about Carolyn's legacy, and I hope people look her up, and I hope that, maybe someday she'll be written into the history, because I haven't seen that yet about her role, and maybe you'll do that. So.
Oh, for sure. If I, yes.
Yeah, right. But it's hard to envision writing a history, but I urge you to do it. So anyway, but thank you, and I'm gonna move on now, folks, unless there's anything else.
I have just a curiosity question for Barbara.
Yes.
Since you worked in Dr. Sattler's office, I was just curious, were you aware of any relationship between Dr. Sattler and Edward Casey?
I should be better acquainted with that question. Mark Kulicki, my former husband and now deceased, really looked into that with some others, and I just would have to check some of the history of it. But what I would say is that by the time I was there, that wasn't really talked about that much during the years I was in the offices at 533. It would come up as a question, but I just would have to be sure to check the historical record of when they met or saw each other.
Yeah, as you know, there's speculation that he may have been the sleeping.
Yes.
He was called the sleeping prophet.
Yes.
So,
now I will say this: there have been many speculations about who the sleeping subject was, or the human subject for the transmission of the papers, as the Urantia book refers to it in the text. And there continue to be some very interesting speculations.
Okay. It was just my geeky curiosity question for the day.
But certainly Casey's one of them.
Yeah.
Well, there
I'm
is
not gonna say some of the others because they're too close to home, but I do think it's important to know that maintaining the anonymity of that subject was one of the pledges that the contact commissioners took. And so I, in my experience, never saw anything in the office that would indicate that they had not kept that pledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
That
you.
I could say. I would have said that in court had I been allowed to, when I did testify for Urantia Foundation, ultimately.
Okay. And there is a book on called Edgar Casey and the Urantia book, which somebody brought to me when I used to be a book publisher to publish that. And I actually made a trip to the Edgar Casey Foundation and asked them to look at this manuscript. And they wrote back and said, this can't be right. However, Casey was in Chicago a bunch of times during the 20s. So this may be some possible connection there, but all right, well, moving on. We now, it's like we're almost like funeral home here. We've got two different funerals, two different, events for the passing of prominent pioneers. And of course, George Barnard has played such a big role in the larger correcting time, and certainly as a herald of the magisterial mission, but of many other things. And we have two folks are going to talk about their encounters with him. And I'm going to say just a few words about my own encounters. And if I can make it work, I'm going to play a very short snippet of George's voice so people can hear him. But my own encounters with him were back in about 20 years ago when he first made a kind of a tour. He came from Australia to the United States to see the people in the teaching mission who were at celestial contact. And he just really made the rounds and stayed with a lot of people. He stayed with me in my place in Northern California for 2 or 3 nights. And what I remember about George is that he didn't actually eat anything. He would just drink coffee with sugar in it. That's the way I remember it. He didn't want breakfast. He just wanted coffee. And but he was really a fun, interesting, witty guy who was deep, just uncompromisingly honest about things and sometimes pretty blunt. I get along with him pretty well, but other folks, may not have. And as he made the rounds in the United States, he came to the conclusion that the teaching mission people that had celestial contact in the United States did not have a capacity to organize well. He came to that conclusion, and he said the Americans, have some kind of a problem, or it's maybe narcissistic or something that they cannot really self-organize. And he was right about that in a lot of ways, because the teaching mission folks did not organize well at that period and were kind of fell into small groups and became a little bit diffuse. So I thought George showed some very good judgment, and he was a psychologist, and he also was a businessman and industrialist who was successful. So he had a practical, down to earth, but eccentric way of doing things. I think now would be a good time to play the excerpt. I'll just add that he and I ended up being his publisher for his first book, which he then bought back from us, but it was called The Search for 1111. It's still available. So let's see if this works. And bear with me, I'll bring up this audio, and it's an interview I did with him some years ago.
Yeah, here's a question. We know there are many off-planet midways. That's a good name for them.
I'm just going to say, can you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So we had a series of questions, and this was one of the questions I emailed to him about supplemental midwares. But I think first we should just, for those who are a little bit new, the midware, the secondary midwares, there were 1,111 of them. And then supplemental to that came new midwares, and this is what he said on that question.
Have been added here on the Urantia. You refer to these as alien midwares. Yeah, maybe gasps is a bit better way of explaining it. There are quite a few people that unknowingly are working with these midwares. We do have an extra 150,000.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. That is the number.
Now, so there were 2 categories, I thought. There was some that were rehabilitated rebel midwares and some that were from other planets.
Yeah, they're our own. The 1,111 were always loyal in the first place.
Right.
The 873 were so-called rebels. In my view, they were just delinquents. I've heard many complaints about them having required a lot of education, and that either wasn't available or it was available to them from primary midwares that had gone, off the wrong end anyway. That were on Calagastia's side.
Right.
So basically, to put it in a nutshell, when I first asked ABC 22 with all his, I mean, I thought he was a ghost, you know. When I asked him if he had always been straight, his answer was, there was no law. There was
No
nothing
law?
for him to work by. So he made some mistakes. So I don't see these guys as rebels at all. I think it's a very crooked name, and Marco Venta doesn't agree with me on that. But
Anyway, so that gives you a great taste of him, because he's the only person I know who would disagree openly with Macaventa. And that's George in a nutshell. He was just so independent and so feisty, and all that said, I'm now going to ask Vicky to do a little bit of sharing about George, Vicky Vanderheyden, and Vicky, I think you had a couple of items you wanted to read, correct?
I did, but I want to first just comment a little bit on, I've got to find my notes here, my memories here. I wanted to mention the fact that George was a protege. George heard the celestial beings since childhood, which I think explains some of his behavior. They actually went through adolescence with him. That's an interesting thought, I thought, and so I think it explains to me how sometimes I almost felt like it wasn't irreverence. I think that's too strong of a word, but he did challenge them. He did, and everything that I've read and known about him. My first experience with George was, I believe, in the 1990s when I ordered the Akashic Construct CD. I was in my 40s. I had been reading the Urantia book since I was 25. I was ready in some ways and not ready in others. But I think that experience of going through the Akashic Construct with him, with that CD, it was a creative process which assisted you to get into stillness and to connect with the celestials and to possibly become involved in a healing component. And I, to this day, remember the setting that I created in my mind as a result of that experience. And I wasn't very good. It would be 10 years, more than that, almost 20 years before I would begin hearing. But it was quite an experience. It was my first attempt to collaborate with the celestials, and George provided the tool. And I will always be grateful for that. He also introduced me to Dr. Mendoza for the first time, who came later in my life to assist me with my family after my husband passed. I've had a couple experiences with Dr. Mendoza. And I think that one of the things that stands out for me with George is this close relationship with the midwayers, to the point where he would accent that, they have a sense of humor. He has a sense of humor. They would express this sense of humor, which I also see, by the way, with Monjoranson. And, it allows you to lighten up a little bit with these celestial beings. And when then I was introduced to 3 off-planet midwayers about 6 or 7 years ago, one after another one afternoon, which just blew me away that day. It was the background that George had given me that helped me direct my questions and get to know them. So those are pieces that stood out for me as far as George is concerned. I'm not sure how many people understand the whole prompting that the midwayers participate in at the direction of Melchizedek. And it is primarily the secondary midwayers that do that. Although I will say that I have sensed that maybe I am being prompted by the off-planet midwayers that I believe have been assigned to me. I think it's important for us to realize that we as human beings are pattern makers, and we always have been. We create and we find and we look for patterns. But like what was said, that these 1111 prompts, which also come in other numbers like 1012, or 1210, I mean, or 1211, excuse me, 911, 222, 333, 1234. All of these are all part of the 1111 prompting process. This is related to the Urantia book, and there is a reason behind it. And it is primarily to remind us that we are not alone, that they are here with us. And when I started, which is just very recently, started transmitting Machiaventa, he shared a transmission with me on March 27th of this year called Heads Up, We Are Prompting You. And I won't read the whole transmission, but it certainly is out there. I'm sure you can find this if you're interested. It was the March 27th. But this is how he described the prompting. He said, and now we say to you, heads up, and remind you as well that included in these prompts will most likely be a message. Yes, our prompts tell you what you have come to understand, that we have a presence among you, that you are not alone. But do not walk away without knowing that we wish to share something of added significance as well, a personal message designed for you and specifically related to your place and time. With each prompt, we ask that you pause and listen long enough to create a space for us so that you may download the contents of the message. And when you can, we ask that you take the time to sit back and ponder in a state of calm, in the quiet moments of stillness, and listen with your heart. It may come to you in many forms, an insight, a reminder, or a feeling. You may see an image, hear a song, or feel an urgency to lend someone a hand. It may even highlight for you the significance of something you were doing at that time. Though the possibilities are endless, know that however you perceive it, a message is waiting that includes you in this larger family that may extend your awareness, assist you in a time of need, or that may propel you toward an action.
Thank you, Vicki.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Very, very well done. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, Chris Morris. A lot of you know Chris as one of our best transmitters, and many of his transmissions go out on the 1111 progress list. And if anybody's not getting those, it's, I think the very best thing that's going on in our circles now is what George started over 10 years ago, is sending out these short versions of the rather than long transcripts. George had, again, being the practical person that he was, he got this down to a smaller lesson. And I'm so grateful for that, because, you know, you get these 3 or 4 times a week and they're just right. And anyway, Chris's messages have been on there, and I'm going to just turn this over to you, Chris, to pick it up and take it where you want. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. George, I've known George since probably 2006, and been pretty much in weekly contact with him for the last 12 years. So he certainly will be missed. And as Byron, as you said, he had a requirement for all his receivers and for their teachers, celestial teachers, that we get a 1-page lesson. It was 700 words max. And he said there's a reason for that, because, you know, it was George, he was a psychologist. And he says, you know, human attention span is very limited, and anything more than a page, they're not going to read it. And, you know, I kind of wrestled with that at first, but then I came to understand he was absolutely right. And when the teachers would come through, they always came out with exactly one page that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I was at the bottom of the page. It was between 600-700 words every time. So they were sanctioned teachers in this program, organized by Machiaventa Melchizedek. And George was, as you said, Byron, he was quite a character. And he did, at times, like you said, he was very blunt, and a lot of people didn't know how to take him. And he did make some enemies because of that. It's unfortunate that happened, because he brought so much. He brought a lot of revelation to us, and especially his relationship with the midwares was, it was very organic in that he was working with them, not even knowing, not even having seen a Rancha book since the 1970s. He worked with them in his clinic, and they worked with him, and they saved a lot of people from suicide and all kinds of things the midwares did with him. And it was really interesting. And he was quite a psychic. And if anybody's ever read any of his books, he gives account of some very astounding experiences that he's had. He could astral travel, anywhere on the planet, and describe places and people and things very clearly. And he helped me out on many occasions when I was dealing with some of these rebels on this world. And he pulled a lot of stuff out of my auric field that was causing a lot of trouble for me, and he did this for a lot of other people too. And so I really love George, and I'll never forget the things that he did for me. And his wife Sandy is just a beautiful soul. And together they serve so many people. I mean, they literally spent 10-12 hours a day answering emails and questions from people from all over the world. And I met George very organically. I was one of those people that were starting to see 11/11 to the point where it was alarming. I mean, it was so astounding and so outside the realm of statistical possibility that I did what a lot of people did, is I got on the internet and I Googled 11/11, and I saw George's site there, and I started to explore what he was saying there. And I not only did I explore his site, but I looked at a lot of other ones that just didn't ring my truth bells. And so when I started reading and I got on his forum and was trying understanding what all this was, I was introduced to the Rancha book. And literally, when I got my hands on that book, I devoured that book. And I devoured it not just once, but I probably read it 20 times cover to cover, and some of the sections probably more than that. And I looking back now, I see what was happening was the celestial teachers that later on would be introduced to me. They required this as a library for me to have in my mind that they would draw from when they would give their messages to me. They'd send these little, I call them little packets, these little thought packets, and I would unravel them in my mind and then turn them into human language. And they were pulling from this library of experiences and knowledge from the Urantia book. And it's been a very interesting journey, especially the exploration into consciousness, all kinds of consciousness, the consciousness, not just humans, but celestials, angels, and we're all connected, and we can literally contact any intelligence in the universe if we want to. We have, the thought adjuster there, who is our spiritual operator and really can connect us just by the asking. And I've done this on many occasions. But yes, it's George. He provided a lot of new revelation for us, especially those in the teaching mission who followed the 1111 Progress Group messages. George was he was a very good channel. I think some of his messages lacked the background because he would often have conversations offline with midwayers, and then they would come back and answer some of his questions, and we didn't always have the background. So I would often ask George, what was that in context to, and he would explain. But yeah, his contribution to making 1111 and tying that to the midwayers is a tremendous piece of revelation for all of us, I think. And it still continues today. People are seeing it all the time, and they look for it. That's what they'll find. They'll find those messages from George Bernard and in the Progress Group, and it's been a part of my life ever since. I'll always be grateful for that experience and for the opportunity that George gave me. It was a couple of years after or a couple of years after I had left the Christian church because I was just disillusioned by it. I lost my father and two brothers in a very short period of time, and I started seeing these 1111 time prompts. They were everywhere, and it was just it was alarming at some points. I mean, things would be so mind-blowing coincidences that you would think were coincidences, but they weren't. Not only seeing the time prompts, but seeing it on billboards, on cars and trucks, on receipts from the store, $11.11. I mean, it would just show up everywhere. And it was like, they were trying to get a hold of me like, hey, we got something for you to do. And they did get a hold of me. And I thank George Bernard for getting me on this path. And he really is responsible for me finding my way to where we are today. So I really owe a lot to George.
Thank you, Chris. I wanted to ask you if you care to say a little bit about the work with George with regard to the borderland issue on the planet. Do you want to talk about that today, or maybe come back another time?
Yeah, maybe we could do probably a whole night on that. But yeah, they're definitely in the Urantia book didn't really talk too much about borderland. As you know, this world is full of all kinds of consciousness, and consciousness lives at different vibrations, and these all settle in these different circuits around the planet. And the borderland is an area where, as you know, this planet, there's a lot of people that pass from out of life here that aren't really prepared for the mansion worlds. They're very immature as souls. And there is a remedial plan was put in place by Michael to educate these souls and prepare them, at least to get them to the mansion worlds. And so there were areas in consciousness where people that weren't prepared for mansion world could find some remedial help. And I want to get into this will be another time we talk about it, about what I call soul fragments and the misunderstanding that this world has with reincarnation. It is very misunderstood. But what we had was an overpopulation of all this energy in this borderland area. And this is something that on dispensations, when we have a dispensation, a lot of this energy gets cleared out. And it had been building up now since our last major dispensation. And so I was starting to encounter a lot of deceased energy being attracted to me. And I used to live in Michigan. I'm now here in North Carolina. And I was having a little bit of that trouble in Michigan, but when I moved to North Carolina, near these old mountains here and the strong ley lines that run through this area, I was attracting a lot of this deceased energy constantly. And at first it was very debilitating, and I didn't understand it at first. And George was one of the guys that he went into his construct and he could see what it was. He was pulling off all these entities that were attached to me. He said they were deceased persons, and I didn't know why they were being attracted. I was attracted to me like that. But so him and I worked through a period of time where I was trying to understand what was actually happening to me, and he was really helpful to me in that sense, because it was quite disturbing at first if you didn't understand what was happening. But later on, I got quite an education about it, and I was able to deal with these things on my own. And this has gone on into much greater and greater epics, I would call them, of moving this kind of energy off the planet. And I don't want to talk too much about that tonight, but I'll come back and we'll talk more about that stuff. But yeah, George and I, we had a few really interesting episodes where we did find that there were some groups that were targeting us because of the work that we were doing, bringing light to this world. And there was groups that would send some pretty nasty things our way. And we found that there was this Jesuit priest, ex-Jesuit priest in California that was he was working with satanic powers, and he was sending these entities to attack me at night. And George and I, he saw this guy in his astral travels, and it was pretty interesting what had happened after that. He was able to do things in his astral work to stop this guy from doing what he was doing to us. And so that's another really interesting story, and I have quite a bit of detail on that we could talk about another time. But
yeah,
George was great because of the things that he could do. Very talented individual, very psychic individual. And when he says he had a relationship with midwives, you have to believe him. He really did. And he knew them quite well. And they were his friends as a child. He said he saw them sitting at his dinner table just like one of his family members.
Mhm.
I mean, he actually physically saw them. And I think that makes him extraordinary. You know, where some of us can hear through channeling or whatever, he actually saw them, which is remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot more, Chris, we should talk about another time.
Yeah.
But if you could speak to one more thing, that the magisterial mission cannot proceed if there are thousands or millions of souls sort of trapped in this borderland region, right? So that the task that you and many, many other people, including many non-Urantia people, has been to release these souls from that domain to go up to the mansion worlds. That is co-creative. It has to involve a human helper. And am I correct in saying that we can't have the magisterial mission until that kind of cleansing has occurred?
Well, I think it is occurring, has occurred, and is ongoing continually now. And I think a lot of that energy has actually been moved off. I've had very little contact with deceased energies in the last year. So I see that curtailing greatly now.
Okay.
So this, I say we're really getting ready for this magisterial mission. It's coming to a head. I will say that there is still a rebel contingent in this world. They live in the consciousness layers of this world, and that definitely has to be removed before magisterial mission will begin. And that is ongoing, and it is happening right now.
Right. Yeah. This is why it's so important for us to compare notes about these issues and have documentation around this. And I've been in groups where this has been discussed, and putting all this information together so that we can kind of figure out what is meant by rebel midwear, what is meant by the fact that there's still some sort of cleanup or mop up of the Lucifer Rebellion when we were told some different things by other transmitters. And Dave Tenney and I have had discussions, and others of us have had discussions about, we need to have disclaimers about what we're claiming is the case, because we can't prove these things. But there's preponderance of messages that we're getting, but there are contradictions in this body of work going back to the early 90s. So I think that's a task for us, for our group, perhaps, to work through the source material, talk to people like Chris, who are on the front lines, and move that into a place where we can discuss it in a more widely. But I don't think there's been enough due diligence yet of that, and of the methodologies that we need to bring to that, or whatever, the theology and anthropology, whatever you want to call it, to make clarity about this huge issue on the planet.
Yep.
You go on and on. I mean, all the works of Timothy Wiley, this series of 8 books about the rebel spirits, that's another factor that's not factored in very well. It stands by itself, but it's kind of contradictory to some other things. So we'll get it worked out.
Yep, absolutely.
But I think in principle, the notion is that you wouldn't want to have a visitor like the Master Leovonal's son come here unless we've done some of our homework and some of our sort of self-organizing of the planet and cleaning up our act first.
Well, I don't think that we're necessarily preventing that from happening. I think things are going according to plan. I think our celestial administrators have orchestrated these things and put things in place far ahead of time for things to happen in a certain order. And I think they are happening. And I see tremendous change going on right now energetically in the things that I'm experiencing that tell me we are getting very close now, very close.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a sense that they have the steps all worked out. They're going to happen, but it's up to us as to the pacing of it.
Sure. I mean, they work out they have a framework basically that they work to, right? They have a framework, and of course, free will is the wild card in this, right? So, but I think they're pretty good at predicting the behavior of Urantians. What they're not so good at predicting are acts of deity, right? And so, I'd like to talk to you guys about some of the things that I've been writing recently about thought adjuster contact, conscious contact with the thought adjuster. And, I've had visions and dreams and a lot of insights about what I call the day of equilibrium. And that's a paper that I published recently on my website that if you guys would like to check that out and see what you think about it. It talks about an event that where humanity will experience moments of equilibrium, meaning contact with the thought adjuster, mind to human mind. And that will be the game changer. It does not include, it will not interfere with human will in any way, but it will certainly change our perspective going forward. And I think this is something that is going to be necessary for us to accept the magisterial son when he shows up in the flesh. I think if he showed up today, we might do the same thing we did to Jesus. It's just not the right climate for him. But I see if a good majority of people start having contact with their thought adjusters, and I talk about it from a personal experience actually that I had when I was in my 27th year. I had conscious contact with my thought adjuster, and it was life changing. But at the same time, it didn't make me into this. It didn't change me. I didn't progress necessarily. I had a new perspective on things that pointed me in the direction that led me to where I am today. And so, but that guidance then was always with me, and I always felt it at times whenever I was experiencing moments of truth, beauty, and goodness. This high vibration, this loving, warm embrace would enrapture me. And it was my thought adjuster encouraging me, pointing the way. Yes, this is the way. And then later on, I started having contact with celestial teachers. And so I really believe it was that what I call the day of equilibrium, when I had contact with my thought adjuster, that made all these things possible. And if it happened to me, it certainly can happen to every one of you. I'm not special anyway. I wasn't born a psychic. I had a real honest curiosity to understand if the creator was real and what this reality was all about. And it was revealed to me in a very, very profound, supernatural way. I would have to say it was definitely a supernatural experience. Yeah.
I'll get that link from you and I'll send that out to everybody about that article.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you. It's about, it's 8:10. And now we have an optional unit here, which is rather than a big group conversation, how about if we do breakout groups? And all of you know what that is? It's just kind of hit a button here and then you randomly are assigned to a group of 4 or 5 people to discuss what we've just talked about and to come up with some ideas or questions pertinent to what we're talking about today that can be addressed, that can then have somebody in a group report back to us. And then if you want to sign off now, that's fine. I'm going to stop the recording. So this is going to be just private for us. And let's try and see if it works for us. So try to get somebody to be the spokesperson, and let's keep it practical, something specific that you'd like to discuss when we come back. So give it about 10 minutes. Sound good? And so I'll prompt this, and I hope I do it right. It's the first time I've done it. And take some time and say hello to each other, and see if you can come up with questions, comments, something to report back. All right, here we go. Okay, it should be 3 or 4 to a room. So we'll see you in a few minutes. So yeah, click to get into the room. Oh, look, we're in a room. Hi, Shane.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good.
Hi, Eileen. Eileen, can you hear us?
I had to pop out for a second, just in the middle of getting the kids down to bed.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
It's that awkward timing.
Oh, you want to come back?
Yeah, I'll have to. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Hey, Eileen. Hi. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Good. You're not. I hear your voice, but your image is frozen. But that's all right.
Well, that's how I want it. I want you just to hear my voice.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Oh, there you go.
I have a little dental issue until I take care of it. I'd rather not be seen.
Okay. Oh, sure.
Okay.
So.
I don't see how to, all I see in my screen is to go to Barbara Newsom's room 4.
Oh.
It doesn't say anything else.
Well, then, is there something for you to click? You see?
No, it says later or join breakout room, but it says.
Yeah, you have to hit that to join that room. Eileen? Hi, Shane. Actually, you're supposed to go to a room. Do you see a place to click to go to a room? But you don't have to. It'd be nice to chat with you. I don't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry.
You and
I had to step out there my kids were crying upstairs, so I had to help my wife out for a second. So, sorry, you're assigning people to rooms right now?
Yeah, and you should have had a signal to join a room. But
Okay.
you can just stay with me if you like. We just catch up a
Sure.
little bit. Yeah.
Sure, I'll probably have to pop out again. It's that awkward bed timing for me. It's the story of my life right now. But
Oh well, that's the great work. I mean,
it is, yeah.
much more important than what we're doing here.
How have you been doing?
I've been all right. I'm still in Cincinnati. Sort of in exile, you might say, from New York City, where I was, and left during COVID, and finished up school. And actually, in just 2 weeks, I'll be done. So,
Okay.
yeah, pretty much it. And wrote a thesis, and going to be out looking for work.
So change is coming up?
It's always coming up. Since 1953, I haven't seen much of anything but change.
Yeah.
It's good to have you back. I haven't seen you for a bit.
No, it was just, it seemed like every time it was happening that I had some family situation going on. But I asked my wife to hold off for a little bit here on Sunday night so I could get here tonight.
So you've been in touch with Joshua, my friend.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Josh, I had connected with him a little while ago, and he's written so many interesting essays and has done a lot of work, and in one of the conversations I threw out the idea of him doing a podcast, because I think he'd be a perfect guy to do to just touch on all sorts of different topics. And he said that he was planning that. And then I was quite shocked for him to ask me to be involved with it.
Oh, good.
Which is really exciting. And this past year for me has been really amazing. And I've been trying to find ways to serve, to be of service, to do something, to try and figure out what I'm kind of being led to or called to do. And so the idea was, it's really exciting. I'm just trying to figure out how I can best do, like, I have some self-doubts about, my abilities, like, being on camera and,
Oh,
speaking eloquently, and,
you're fine.
I think that stuff's, important, right? Um, but I don't want to turn it down just out of fear, right? So,
Yeah. Well, it's a big commitment.
yeah.
I mean, if I talked to him, a lot over the years, and
Mhm.
uh, I've never been able to get him to open his mind to celestial contact.
Mm, mm.
So, at one point he said he declared Arizona to be a no Monduransum zone. He was
Yeah.
that much opposition to what we're doing, and
Yeah.
lately he's been a little bit more open-minded, but he really doesn't think that it's possible.
Yeah.
It might be paranormal things that happen, but contact you.
Right. And there's so many people like that. Like, there's people I talk with that are on this, that same level, and
Yeah.
and that's like, everyone's entitled to their own
Yeah.
opinions. And,
Yeah, that's what he does. He's not going to use that data at all, other than to be a critic, which is fine. We need critics.
Mhm.
And he and I, she and I shared the same girlfriend.
Oh, is that right?
Over many years. So
Oh, yeah.
it was an issue. And I'm following his political stuff too a lot.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, I hope you do it. I mean, I think I think you're a natural on camera.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. I definitely have a lot of suggestions. I think I'd be good at the development side of things, and maybe trying to structure, the way to pose ideas, or structuring questions for interviews. And I think, like, when I was seeing some of the stuff you were doing online, that led me to Derek Samaras. We talked about that, and I think, what he's doing is really important. And if we get a lot of people creating really good content, it can only do positive things down the road, I feel. So I think if we can all work together in certain ways, even if we have differences of opinions, that we're united in our goals of what we want for humanity. So, yeah, we'll see.
Your kids are going to grow up, and you're going to. I'm sure you're going to be really active, and we're going to be gone. So, we want to pass whatever we can do.
This is a really good way to reach the next generation.
Yeah.
Right.
This medium. Yeah.
This medium. Yeah. Video, podcasts, leaving stuff behind that people can look back on.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, how do we do that in effective ways? I know with, some of the people my friends and colleagues and whatnot, who, aren't Urantia book readers, aren't even really spiritually minded. I feel like people, especially with the COVID situation, have been a lot more open to just thinking about something that feels a little bit more outside of the box to them. And it's like, what are some good ways to present that? Like, not necessarily hitting them with the Urantia book, right? It's not for everybody, but I've had some really good conversations on scientific matters where, people have opened up a little bit more, like, just how materialistic science is generally right now, right? And since I was a kid, I always felt that science, when you dive deep into it, when you start looking at the quantum, it's only leading back to God, right? So anyways.
Just a minute, I'm going to send a message to everybody that we're big up.
I think I'm going to have to pop up stairs again.
Okay.
I apologize, but I'll try to get back in.
Pop back in, and maybe say a few words if you care to the group.
All right. Sounds good.
Good, man. Thanks.
Good to see you again.
Same here. Be well. Dave.
Hi, back.
So are you guys done?
Yeah, we saw your message, so we came back, and I think the others are signing out also.
Okay, I'll
I made
close
it
up.
back.
Hi,
Hi, back.
me. Okay, I'll bring everybody back now. Hey, Les.
Hey, Byron.
See you, brother.
Yes, sir.
We gotta
Let-
catch up.
Les, where are you? Where do you live?
New York City.
Oh, you're in New York.
New Yorker.
Uh-huh.
Yes. The Big Apple here.
Hi, honey.
There's my friends who just live so close that we can't see each other.
No.
Hi. We're in Santa Fe and we're all in lockdown.
You guys are in total lockdown now?
Pretty much, yeah. We don't have the hospital facilities. They're going to start triaging and throwing people outside, they said today in the news. Like, you get to live and you get to die. But so we're playing it safe.
I saw your thing come up and I came back, but I don't know if everybody else did. There they are.
Here they are.
Okay.
They're diehards. We hung out the last 2 seconds.
Well, how did that go? I hope you're able to come to some questions or conclusions, and I'm going to just throw it open. It's not being, oh, it's still recording. Oh, shoot, I got to shut off the recording. I forgot. But anyway, just chime in. Whoever would like to do so, or raise your hand.
Well, one of our questions, and that's really all we talked about, was how do you know if you're